What up? What up? Hopefully the Bears are losing tonight. I'm not going to watch that atrocious team anytime soon. I got some good news. This one is definitely going to be over 10 minutes. This is a really important set of notes. Hence, we're in class looking at a little green light, listening to Mr. Dowdy to start the day. Did I mention I got a new haircut? And it's kind of fun to play with my hair. I don't know. You get a new haircut, you're like messing with your hair. Okay, I'll stop being a goof. Um, Roles of the president. Many of these roles are constitutional in basis, maybe loosely alluded to in the Constitution, um, but nonetheless gives the president power to have a influence over certain aspects of government. The first one we're going to talk about is legislation or public policy. Yesterday, we talked about policy agenda and how the president has their own agenda of what kind of policies and public policy he wants to advance, where Congress may have a very differing view, especially now that we have divided government, a differing view of what is essential in regards to public policies that we're going to push forward. However, the president has the ability to veto, and of course, that's a huge power, but we'll get into that in a second. Proposed legislation, again, you have the bureaucratic agencies that have a tremendous amount of knowledge about the intricate details of whatever policies they represent, whether it be the Department of Agriculture with agricultural policy, whether it be the Department of Health and Human Services, um, with the example of Obamacare. They provide a lot of detailed information because they are policy experts. I would hope they're policy experts if they are running that portion of our government. So, a lot of times you'll have proposals of pieces of legislation from the executive branch to Congress. Again, usually that link between Congress and the president is the chief of staff for the president, who will go to Congress and request, hey, consider this legislation, the president wants it. And again, the Speaker of the House is going to have a lot of influence in that regard, and they don't necessarily have to pay any attention to what the president wants. The president can veto legislation, and therefore that's a tremendous influence on what Congress is doing. If you know, as a leader in Congress, whether it be the Speaker or the majority leader of the Senate, that a particular piece of legislation could be struck down with a veto, then you're probably not likely to spend much time on that. Or you may try to compromise or look for some compromise with the executive branch or individuals in the executive branch on that piece of legislation. Again, the president can call special sessions of Congress, as which happened after 9/11 and the Katrina situations. Call Congress back into the session, and usually this has to do with funding. After the Hurricane Katrina, FEMA is a federal agency, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, needed tremendous amounts of money to be able to help people in Louisiana and the South. So you need appropriations for that money. The president may call Congress into session for that. The president also annually, which we won't see in class this semester, but usually in January or February in the Constitution, it says the president will address Congress. Basically, this is giving them an update on a lot of things, and I think that was the original intent. However, this has been used, and think about media, the bully pulpit the president uses to try to force Congress, hopefully, to consider his initiatives or his policy agenda. So the president will appear in front of Congress and list all these things that he wants Congress to consider in the upcoming session. And it doesn't mean, again, that Congress has to follow these things, but if the president goes up and says, "I want to make uh, college education more affordable for the citizens of this country," that looks very appealing. If I want to ensure that senior citizens get Social Security without any diminished benefits, that looks very appealing to old people. So it puts a little bit of pressure on Congress to maybe consider his policy agenda. Of course, there are checks. Congress A does not have to pass any proposed legislation from the executive branch. And secondly, they may override a veto with a two-thirds supermajority vote. This rarely ever happens. So, although they do have these powers, maybe this kind of illustrates, especially now with divided government, why pieces of legislation and public policy have not passed on a very frequent basis. Because president can propose something, Congress doesn't like it, they just don't consider it. Congress wants to propose something, the president threatens a veto, they don't consider it. Leads to a lot of gridlock um, in our democracy and in our government from a federal standpoint. The president is also the chief executive. Clearly, that is the focus of Article 2 of the Constitution, meaning that the president carries out laws. Congress can pass all the laws that they want, but they have no way in which to carry out the laws. So the president and all of the agencies in the bureaucracy enforce laws, treaties, and court decisions. That is their role. They execute the law. The president appoints officials to office, meaning the bureaucratic agencies, whether it be Department of Defense, with the Secretary of Defense, whether it be the head or the IRS, etc. And they can get rid of them as they please. Now, this usually does not happen with an official firing. If the president asks you to step down, if you're Secretary of Health and Human Services, you're probably going to do that. You're not going to kind of diss the president. And a good example of that was when Obamacare was being rolled out. It was passed by Congress, and it's up to the bureaucratic agency, in this case, the Department of Health and Human Services, to implement that particular piece of legislation. Again, that usually comes with a lot of money, appropriations. What happened was they rolled out this website for people to sign up for healthcare, and it was a colossal disaster. It didn't work, it shut down, it crashed. And so, of course, as you would imagine, House and Senate Republicans were very critical of that Department of Health and Human Services, the Obama administration, in regards to what happened. Having the Secretary of Health and Human Services appear in front of committee. What the heck went wrong? Again, this is congressional oversight. When things go wrong in the bureaucracy or when they have questions, they can call the leaders of these bureaucratic agencies to appear in front of them. Shortly thereafter, the Secretary of Health and Human Services resigned. I would imagine she took the fallout for all of this, even though it probably had nothing to do with her, Kathleen Sebelius, and she was probably asked to step down. Again, the president can issue executive orders, which must have some tie to one of the bureaucratic agencies. So, for example, I gave the example of don't ask, don't tell. President Clinton enforced this or passed this executive order in the 90s to allow gays and lesbians to serve in the military. He instructed the Department of Defense to allow gays and lesbians to serve, but they couldn't tell anyone they were gay. And the military promised not even to ask you if you were gay. So as long as you don't tell them you're gay and they don't ask you, you're good to go. And again, executive orders don't need congressional approval. These have been increasingly used over the last, I would say, half a century to increase the power of the presidency. Checks. Congress can pass laws that can trump, I love using that term, or eliminate executive orders. So if you want to be concrete and clear and Congress doesn't like an executive order, they can pass a law that specifies or clarifies whatever that policy area is. Again, with the don't ask, don't tell, they pass a law saying that individuals who are gay and lesbian, I suppose transgendered, bisexual, etc., could serve, and they didn't have to hide their sexuality. And that was a way to make it concrete policy that in our country you can serve regardless of your sexual orientation. Because the reality is, had don't ask, don't tell remained, another president could just eliminate it with executive order. So presidents can kind of change other presidents' executive orders with another executive order. The biggest, I would say, check on those bureaucratic agencies and the enforcement of laws is the power of the purse. Congress has the ability to fund. And a lot of times when they're calling in these heads of departments are saying, hey, listen, you're screwing up. We're not going to give you more money unless you can explain to us how you're going to fix this or make sure this doesn't happen again. This happens all the time. A lot of times you have these heads of departments appearing in front of committee. Incidentally, fun fact of the day, you actually have Supreme Court justices appear in front of the Senate Judiciary and House Judiciary Committee, providing rationale for their budget. So the judicial branch has a budget, pretty big budget. And so every year they have to appear, and there's usually one or two justices that appear. It's kind of an interesting congressional oversight hearing when you have Supreme Court justices appear in front of them. The Senate plays a big role with their approval or their confirmation powers. So they can reject appointments, they can reject treaties by the executive branch. So if Barack Obama appoints Mr. Dowdy to the Secretary of Defense, which would be a pretty awesome position, Congress, specifically the Senate, could say that's a horrible decision. Horrible. All he's going to do is be infatuated with ISIS, which I believe we should be. Impeachment, you can also impeach by the House and remove by the Senate. It's a process. You can impeach but not be removed from office. The president, judges, heads of bureaucratic agencies. And of course, the Supreme Court, a separate entity, can strike down executive orders if they are deemed to be unconstitutional. The president is a commander-in-chief. This is in the Constitution. So they head the armed forces and can deploy troops at any time. This has been increasingly used without a formal declaration of war by presidents in the 21st and 20th centuries. Now, we will never know if the framers of the Constitution intended for the president to be sending troops around the country into global skirmishes without any formal declaration. So this is one of the key areas where we've had maybe a lack of clarity in regards to what the framers intended. So while Congress has a formal declaration of war power, we've had presidents send troops to quote unquote wars without formal declaration of war. World War II is the last time we've had a formal declaration. Congress attempts to kind of rein in the president and their ability to send troops, primarily in response to the Vietnam War with the War Powers Act of 1973. Nixon tried to veto. This is one time where you have an override of the veto. And what this basically said was, Congress must consult with, the president must consult with Congress prior to the start of hostility. Now, obviously, if something happens like that with snap of the fingers, the president can send troops within 24 to 48 hours. He has to consult with Congress. And again, the president must remove U.S. forces from hostility if Congress does not declare war or pass a resolution authorizing the use of force. Very, 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 very rarely will Congress go against the military. The military is very unique. They are dedicated to the president. They serve under the president as commander-in-chief. So even though you might be a member of the military and you may be conservative, if President Obama tells you to go fight the war, you're going to do it, and you're not going to question it. That's a hallmark of our military. Do what you're told to do. Sounds a little creepy. So while in theory this looks like this particular piece of legislation kind of reined in the president, it really didn't do much. It didn't have a lot of teeth. It didn't have a lot of provisions that really made it difficult for the president to send troops. Chief diplomat, a good example of that is today when President Obama met with the president of Israel. So the chief diplomat, the president, is an individual who meets with other heads of states and sets the general overall foreign policy of what we're doing in regards to worldwide issues and problems. This isn't only war. President George W. Bush, one of the things that he's not given probably enough credit is his fight against AIDS in Africa. He advocated for a tremendous amount of spending or appropriations to help individual countries in Africa fight this disease. And so that was very humanitarian in nature, not warlike in nature, but humanitarian. Again, the Secretary of State, which falls under the Department of State, most often will carry out or meet with other heads of countries to discuss and probably reiterate the policies that the Obama administration, in this case, has in regards to foreign policy. But the president can appoint and receive ambassadors from other countries, and then appoint ambassadors for our country to other countries. And again, we talked about this today, the ability to negotiate executive agreements, a way to circumvent or get around the formal treaty process. Executive agreements do not need Senate confirmation or approval. Treaties do. So a lot of times presidents have used or gone to using executive agreements. Checks, again, the biggest check for Congress, I believe, on the executive branch is power of the purse, appropriating funds. And of course, they can reject ambassadors and treaties, the Senate, that is, if they feel they are not appropriate. Chief of State, ceremonial, who cares? Chief Jurist. Again, you think about this in regards to the judicial branch. So the president makes appointments to our federal judiciary, the Supreme Court, the Circuit Court, and Circuit Court of Appeals, and the district courts. Of course, needs Senate approval, and the Senate can certainly reject judicial nominations. That has occurred not frequently, occasionally in the history of judicial appointments. The president can also issue pardons and amnesty. Amnesty and pardons are basically a check on the courts, not a check on Congress, but a check on the courts. So what the president can do is, if someone is in jail and they feel that they shouldn't be in jail, they can be pardoned. And so Bill Clinton, for example, in his last month of his presidency, pardoned his half-brother who was in prison, I believe, for a cocaine offense. You don't have to give any rationale. You don't have to give any reason. So usually this occurs at the end of the presidency, where you may be criticizing who he's pardoned. Who cares? The president's leaving. He doesn't really care if you don't like who he's pardoning. These tend to be white-collar crimes or people who are dealing with tax evasion, crimes in regards to breaking campaign laws, etc. And they tend to be sometimes friends of the president. Non-constitutional roles. So these aren't in the Constitution, but it's kind of assumed that the president plays a tremendous role in these regards. Head of political party. Obviously, if you are the president, you probably are going to be assumed the spokesperson for your political party. Barack Obama, now with the Democrats. They have a tremendous amount of influence, obviously, in picking their vice presidential nominee, but they probably have a tremendous amount of influence on the national party as well. Maybe not always spoken, but certainly behind the scenes. It's not going to look good if the Democratic Party goes against the president, who is a Democrat. You're probably going to support a variety of stances that the president has. Patronage, of course, is lessened since we now have the merit system in regards to getting jobs with the federal government. But there are other positions that certainly you can get. Members of the cabinet certainly can be friends, certainly can be people who supported the president heavily, certainly can be individuals who campaigned heavily for the president. Good example is the former Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, used to be the CEO of Chicago Public Schools and used to be very good friends with Barack Obama. And after Barack Obama was hired, lo and behold, Arne Duncan is now the nominee for Secretary of Education. Was he the most qualified person to lead the Department of Education? Absolutely not. But kind of friends with Obama? Play basketball with Obama? And finally, whether they like it or not, presidents are looked at as the individuals who kind of control, or I don't know what term I'm looking for, but have a lot of influence on our economy. I would reason or argue that that's not necessarily the case. Presidents can't really control whether economy is good or bad. Certainly, there's public policy that can either um, provide stimulus for the economy or hurt the economy. Certainly, I think if you raise taxes or sign a bill to raise taxes, that's probably going to, obviously leave less money in citizens' pockets, meaning they can't spend as much money. But generally speaking, when the economy is bad, the president, whether he likes it or not, is going to face a lot of criticism in regards to why our overall health and in our economy is not doing well. So, Barack Obama is going to claim that the economy has been doing much better over the last 2 or 3 years. Does it have anything to do with him and his administration? I don't know. Probably not. Um, take AP Econ and you'll learn about the ebbs and flows of the economy. But whether they like it or not, if the economy goes in the tank, the president's probably going to be taking a big hit for that. All right, so we'll see you tomorrow, or I'll see you in 2 seconds when we're done. Peace.